Well, we'll get this party started. How's everyone doing? It's good to see all you guys online. Um, so this is kind of our Tuesday night webinar, and this day, I'm making sure my camera looks decent. Today we're going to talk about Hashimoto's disease and what can be done for it. We're kind of wrapping up this month. We've been talking about neuroautoimmunities and autoimmune conditions. So if you've heard us on the radio, we've been talking about that between Jake and Dr. Maynard and myself. So I kind of wanted to wrap up the month of August. I know it's September, but I want to wrap this up with something a little bit different, with Hashimoto's. So I know this is something that is definitely a big topic out there. And, even today in the office, I think we had, a new patient that had been diagnosed with Hashimoto's. And then I did a consult with somebody that has Hashimoto's. So this is kind of a topic that doesn't really seem to end. So it's always great to explain to you guys a little bit more about Hashimoto's and what we can do. And that's kind of what I'm hoping to do is share a little bit about what I've learned over the years and maybe some things that you guys can do. Sometimes there's some simple things that you can do for this. It's one of those conditions, one of those autoimmunities that can be really, really easy, or honestly, it can be just really hard. And that's the case for us. So even the consult today, I was telling her that, I can go one direction and, I can do a couple of tweaks and changes and people think, you're amazing, and then another group of patients, I'm just banging my head, and up night trying to research and trying to figure out and testing and retesting and, just get my butt kicked. So, and this is kind of really the case with any autoimmune condition. It's not just with Hashimoto's, but I think that's one of the things our practices can become known for is autoimmune conditions, neuroautoimmune conditions, and things like that. And it's just, they're hard, and so I'll talk about that. We'll talk about the symptoms. They might match some of the things you're struggling with. Maybe you already know you have Hashimoto's. Maybe you don't. So I'll go over a little bit of the lab testing as well, and we'll talk about this for the next, probably a good 40 minutes or so, and then let you guys, replay this and listen to it over and over. So it's kind of my goal with this webinar is something you guys can kind of listen to and replay. So if I talk quick, I apologize, but I'm going to throw a lot of information at you. So let me make sure we're all good to go. And if you guys have questions, definitely I'm going to pull up the chat. So if you have questions, holler at me. I'll try to answer them as we go along. So a little bit about me. So if you're not familiar with who I am, so I have I'm board certified chiropractic neurologist, board certified chiropractic nutritionist. I'm also a CNS certified nutrition specialist, trained in TBI. I've been practicing for 17 years. Goes by super fast. But my practice, what we do is we combine the worlds of like functional medicine and functional neurology. I love to describe it as like peanut butter and chocolate because that's kind of my favorite. So I love bringing these two worlds together, and it's definitely has its moments of challenging patients, and but it's a lot of fun. So some weeks are really easy and some weeks are really hard. Some cases are easy, some cases are hard. So nobody in this office will tell you, oh yeah, life is super fun and grand and everybody gets better and there's balloons and parties. It's definitely a lot of work, but we enjoy that piece. We enjoy the detective piece. Next slide. So actually I wanted to do this. So this is my credit. So I'm going to give credit to Dr. Karazian. Even today, somebody was asking, how do you say his last name? So Dr. Jatis Karazian has been a mentor of mine since 2004. I've been lecturing with him on this topic since I've been lecturing with him since 2006. And I've been lecturing on this book around the country with him for a number of years. So I teach other docs. So I kind of laugh if you see a lot of docs online talking about Hashimoto's. Many of them have been to this course and have read this book. So I think Dr. Karazian probably pioneered this world of Hashimoto's and really brought it to the forefront of understanding it a little bit more. So even when I was first with him, when this book came out, to do a thyroid antibody test was $84. Can you believe that? And now it's to do the two together is $14. So this tells you how far this has come. Even when I started, lecturing on this topic, there wasn't many doctors that would even run thyroid antibodies and look at Hashimoto's. And now you even see mainstream medicine running it on a more regular basis, which is pretty cool. But I remember asking him, I was like, why did you name it? Why do I still have thyroid symptoms? And he told me, he's like, because that's what all my patients said. I have all these symptoms, but all my lab tests are normal. And that's still kind of true today. You see all these patients that come in and their lab tests are normal. They can't figure out what's going on. And a lot of times they have an autoimmune condition. Now, this is kind of the case with a lot of autoimmunities, is that a lot of people have blood work that looks great. They have all their lab testing, it looks great, and nobody can figure out what's wrong with them, but they swear up and down there's something wrong. And this is where we get into a lot of these autoimmune conditions that come into the office. And so I'll kind of explain, this kind of the symptoms, but they really kind of transcend to other conditions, whether it be lupus, RA, neuroautoimmunity, MS, even some of your Parkinson's is autoimmune. There's a ton of autoimmunities out there, and they tend to be the cases that nobody knows kind of where to go or what to do to figure it out. Even had a patient a couple of weeks ago, her doctor just told her, hey, you're going to have to learn to live with this. And she's 32. So that was the last words that they had, is figure out how to live with it and life will be better. So it's a lot of it. It's really interesting what goes on out there. So we'll talk about thyroid symptoms, hypothyroid. Hypothyroid is super incredibly common out there. A lot of people could probably, spout off what the thyroid symptoms are. If you Google it, it's all over the place. But, if we recap, it's your hair is thinning or you're losing it. It's the thinning, not the patchy kind. So sometimes I'll ask patients, is it hair thinning or patchy loss? Those are two totally different things. So we're looking more with thyroid, it's more that hair thinning, and it's kind of all over, where they'll talk about, separating their hair, and they can, see it thinning on different areas of their head. The outer third of your eyebrows are thin. So if you kind of look out here, you'll see they kind of just thin a little bit. As a doc, we have to look and see, are they penciled in? Are they tattooed? Or you can just straight up ask, are your eyebrows getting thin? We see a decrease in metabolism. So these are usually patients or people that go to the gym and they're like, I go to the gym, I promise, and I cannot lose weight. I tried this diet, and this fad, and this, and paleo, and keto, and intermittent fasting, and GAPS, and FODMAP, and they're like, I just can't seem to lose weight. That tends to kind of scream more on the thyroid side. Dry skin, here in Colorado, we ask patients, is it Colorado dry or is it dry skin? Because, Colorado is a very dry climate. So, very often, lotion is kind of our favorite, our friend out here. But, when you kind of see the dry skin, people talk about like flaky dry skin, where you kind of do something like this, if you see, and then, it gets really flaky. Brittle fingernails. So a lot of females mostly will talk about how their fingernails are really brittle. They can't seem to maintain. They break easily. So they have even different sized fingernails. Constipation is really, really common as well, or a very sluggish GI system, or they don't really go to the bathroom very often. Depression, and then even fatigue. Now, what you kind of see with hypothyroid, and I'll reference it to hyper in a second, but with hypothyroid, it really is kind of like that master controller of your system. So you have, I like this analogy where if you ever went to a concert or if you saw a soundboard, on that soundboard, you have the master, so you have the bass, the treble, your mid ranges, your balance, left, right, front, rear. And then on the very edge of that soundboard, you have a big knob, and that big knob is your kind of master control volume. And that's kind of what the thyroid is like. So if you turn your thyroid down, so you go hypothyroid, everything becomes sluggish. So you'll hear people talking about their brain feels sluggish. They feel like they're walking through mud. They feel like they're walking through a fog. Their mood is low. So that's your depression. Their thought process is slow. Processing speed is slow. Their skin heals very slow. It's very dry. Their hair doesn't grow very fast. Their fingernails don't grow very fast. Their digestion is sluggish. They're constipated. Their energy is low. Their muscle strength is low. So you just see everything is low. Now, if we contrast that with hyperthyroid, and you don't see too many of those. You see definitely more hypo than you do the hyper. But with hyperthyroid symptoms, just imagine everything being sped up. So you just turn that knob the opposite way, and now people can't keep the weight on. So they're just losing weight no matter how much they eat. They actually have diarrhea versus constipation. So they'll talk about going to the bathroom 5 to 10 times a day. Instead of having depression, they feel jittery and shaky and anxious, and they can't stop moving. They can't get to sleep because their brain won't stop working. So you kind of see this anxiety, hyperactive, hypertension type of response from these patients. So I kind of correlate that, because when we go into Hashimoto's, when you're looking at the signs and symptoms, they become mixed. So a lot of people tell us that they feel jittery and they have depression. They have diarrhea and they have constipation. So they've been diagnosed with IBS. They talk about their weight is all over the place. Their TSH is high. Their TSH is low. They have to be on a lot of medications. They have to be on a little bit of medications. So you see signs and symptoms are all over the place when it comes to Hashimoto. So we say it's really, you can see hyper and hypo symptoms. I've seen lab work. I had one case years ago that her TSH numbers fluctuated between 0.52 and 54. And they would just fluctuate. And the doc, it was kind of cool for me, but the doc actually ran blood work every single month, and the TSH changed every single month. So guess what the doc did? He changed her medication every single month. And when you kind of see something like that, you're like, okay, time out. This is probably, a Hashimoto's. So then you run the thyroid antibodies, and sure enough, it comes back positive. Another thing that we kind of become suspicious of is anytime we see the TSH is elevated. And I think the highest TSH I've seen is 350, and I've seen all the way down to, 0.0006. So you see this all over the place. But when you start seeing these high elevations of TSH, you start wondering, okay, I wonder if that's Hashimoto's. And the beautiful thing is that through some of these labs that we can utilize, it costs $14 to figure it out. And that's where I think it's crazy that you don't see more of this being ran, that you just see a lot of, try this medication, let's do T4, let's do T3, let's do T4 and T3. So you're seeing all these different mixes where if you would just run the thyroid antibodies, you go, oh my gosh, this person has an autoimmune condition. So now the focus becomes your immune system. So we know the thyroid's being impacted, but it's kind of like the analogy I like using is like a bully on a playground. So if you have the poor little kid that's being picked on, well, yeah, you can put Band-Aids on, and you could put the liquid Band-Aid on their cuts and boo-boos and bruises and Neosporin and all this stuff like that. But you at some point have to address the bully, and that's kind of what everybody does, is they keep like patching up the kid on the playground, but the bully still takes their lunch and pushes them down and kind of beats on them a little bit, and that's not right. So in this case, your immune system kind of becomes the bully. So let's go address the bully and find out, why is the bully acting this way, right? So why is your immune system acting this way? Because this becomes the treatment plan. So we can give medications to somebody who has hypothyroid. We can give supplemental support to somebody that has, hypothyroidism, but we know the immune system is the culprit. But that's not actually where the story stops. The story stops on saying what created the bully. So why is the immune system being the way that it's being? Why is it being hyper responsive? Why is it going after a certain tissue? And so that's when we start diving in deeper. And that's kind of where like the histories come into play and the workup. So you can have different things that cause it, and I'll touch base on that here in a bit. So this is kind of your Hashimoto's process. So a lot of people go like, how does this even take place? Well, we have potential genotypes or genotypic expressions. So if you look at the word genotype, it's like a gene. So we all have different genes that can turn on, right? So this is why you see some people can have Hashimoto's at the age of 20. Some people have Hashimoto's when they're 60. I saw a 6-month-old that had thyroid antibodies. It's all over the place. So we all have these genotype or genotypic potentials that we want to keep off. right? Because if they don't stay off, then they turn into what's called a phenotypic expression. So think about physical. So we have gene that turns physical. So we have a physical expression for Hashimoto's, and that's where you start seeing changes in the thyroid. So the immune system will attack the thyroid slowly over several years. So this is kind of how it looks clinically. Is you see somebody that used to have a TSH of 2, and then it was 2.8, 3.2, 3.6, 4.4, 5.2, and then 5.5. And usually when it hits 5.5, then they go, oh my gosh, you have hypothyroid. But then the patient says, well, I felt like this for the past 5 years. So what's the difference right now? And they say, well, you're 5.5. You're now hypothyroid. That you also can scream that it might be an autoimmune condition where you've had this slow attack for several years. And this is really, really common every time we do a consult. Somebody says, well, I got diagnosed in 2015, but I've had these symptoms since 2008. Like, well, that probably explains maybe that whole hypothyroid autoimmunity. So this leads to a loss of thyroid tissue that leads to a decreased production of thyroid hormones. So your thyroid produces T4. So that's kind of your manufacturing plant. And I should have put a cool graphic on this, but your thyroid gland produces 2 hormones, T3 and T4. And everybody always asks, well, what's that all about? Well, T4 is just 4-iodine. T3 is 3-iodine. So you have these kind of attachments. What happens is your body produces like 93% is T4. So for all practical purposes, we usually say the thyroid produces T4. And then what happens is your body takes one of those iodine molecules, it cleaves it off, and it becomes T3. And T3 is actually where all the goodness happens. That's where the magic happens, and the metabolic rate goes up, and you feel better, and your brain works, and so forth and so on. So your thyroid makes T4. But if your thyroid isn't making enough T4, what happens is there's a signal that goes all the way back up to the pituitary, and it says, what is going on down there? I need T4. I told you to make a certain amount of T4, but that doesn't happen. So the pituitary says, well, then I will scream a little bit louder. So I'm going to increase the TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay. But the pituitary doesn't realize is that you have somebody that's inside the manufacturing plant disrupting things, right? So this whole, you have these really cool, they call it colloid space, where you actually produce the T3s and T4s, and your body actually makes T1s and T2s and cleaves them off. And to me, it's like this cool little manufacturing plant. And so you have somebody that's going inside this plant and it's disrupting it, right? It's changing, the coordinates of the machines. It's messing up the conveyor belts. It's messing up where it splices it. So you have all these things that are getting kind of hijacked because somebody's inside the manufacturing plant disrupting. So now you have T4 that's disrupted, and the pituitary doesn't really understand what's going on. So it's just screaming louder and louder and louder and louder, right? So you might be able to compensate for a bit because the thyroid can still produce T4, but you have somebody in there that's still meddling. Okay. So finally, when you get to, 5.5, 4.5, 6.5, depending on which lab you use, then all of a sudden you get diagnosed with hypothyroidism. And so then you go on medication or replacement. And this is what we kind of see. Some people will be on a Synthroid or Armour, levothyroxine, Thyroxyl, Cytomel, all these different types of medications so that we can manage this. So if your thyroid doesn't make T4, then we give you T4. So then you see the TSH number come down. And the reason why is because the brain thinks, oh, see, you're doing what I asked finally. Well, what it doesn't realize is that you're actually putting in T4. So the system is still not working. You still have somebody meddling in the manufacturing plant, but now the brain thinks that everything is great. So your body takes that T4, helps to convert to T3, the things work, your weight is better, your mood is better, and everything seems to be great, except you still have somebody meddling, right? So what happens over time is that you'll see people go on more and more and more and more Synthroid. So they might start off at 50 micrograms, and they'll go to 75, 100, 125, 150. I think last year I had a patient that was at 300, and I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know it went that high. So you see these elevations where you go, if you're in that much medication, what is going on with the gland? So then that's when we start running thyroid antibodies. So if you can kind of see the picture, this is really common out there. So usually you have a friend that's like, yeah, I went back to my doc and they up my medication again and again and again. And I feel better, but they keep upping it. And then I feel better for like maybe 2 or 3 months. And then my symptoms come back. So then they increase it. I feel better for a couple months and then they increase it. These are the stories we hear all the time, right? So this is why I'm doing a Hashimoto's, because if you guys see this and you go, oh my gosh, there are things that we can do. And this is usually when patients go, I tell you, I'm not crazy. There's something wrong, but I don't know what to do. So we're here to tell you it's not crazy. All right, so here's your exam process. This is what you want from a doc, right? So, if you're here in Colorado, great. If you're in another state, if you're working with another functional medicine doc, there's medical docs that are doing functional medicine, naturopaths, there's chiropractors, osteopaths, acupuncturists, there's a lot of people doing this. So the exam process, you want to make sure that it's thorough, right? You want to make sure they're getting timelines. They're looking at, where did you travel? Did you get sick? Were you pregnant? All these different things I'll explain here in a second. Laboratory testing, make sure somebody understands how to do lab testing, how to do routine testing. So we always do like a complete blood chemistry, because when you're looking at the thyroid, it's not just the thyroid, but what's causing the thyroid? And it could be inflammation. So we want to look at inflammatory markers. We want to look at your white blood cells, because there could be, and I'll show you a list here in a bit, but it could be bacteria, it could be viral, it could be fungal. So some of these things on blood work can give you clues to what's going on. Right? So you want a complete blood chemistry, not these like kind of segmented fractioned chemistries that get ran all the time, but you want something that's comprehensive. And blood work is not that expensive anymore. I mean, you can run a really comprehensive blood work for $150 through a lot of these labs if you talk to your doc. You can run a super complex blood chemistry with a thyroid panel for about $200. So it's several pages of blood work. You can do a lot of cool things with this. Also get somebody who understands, like, can they order an ultrasound if they feel a nodule? Can they run, fine needle aspirations, things like that. So make sure these docs they know what to do with you. And then have a detailed exam. So here's one of the things that frustrates me the most about lecturing over the years is that there's a lot of docs that don't touch the patient, right? So make sure that they actually feel your thyroid. You would think it's kind of a common thing, but I still hear to this day, no one's ever touched my neck, which is really bizarre because I feel like I have a lump, So test them. Part of checking somebody with thyroid is looking at their neurological function, because your thyroid also impacts your brain function. Your thyroid impacts dopamine and serotonin. So these are really important things to say, well, how's your brain? Did you know it actually makes your reflexes sluggish if you have hypothyroid? It makes your muscle strength sluggish. It makes your coordination sluggish. So you want to measure these things to see how the patient's doing. And if you have an autoimmune thyroid condition, you can also have an autoimmune neurologic. There are some correlations between those two systems. So we always double check that the patient is good from a physical, neurologic, metabolic, and immune standpoint. So it's really kind of pulling these worlds together. All right, lab testing. So we kind of touched on lab testing. So this is what I want to show you. So you have, we talked about doing like a comprehensive metabolic panel because it gives you a lot of information. But this is actually a comprehensive thyroid panel. You would be shocked on how very few times I actually see something like this come through. So I wanted to give you all the markers and we'll kind of explain them a little bit. So TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone, and that's what the pituitary sends down to the thyroid to tell the thyroid to produce predominantly T4. Okay, so there is some T3, but predominantly is T4. So T4, when you see the words like total, what that means is that attached to a binder. So you have to have a transport protein to take these hormones to different parts of the body. So whenever you see the word total, it's really kind of, for all practical purposes, it's your protein-bound hormones. So we always tend to look at protein-bound and we look at free fraction. So protein-bound is kind of what the gland makes. Free fraction, we tend to see what's available to be used. So you'll go from like T4 to T3, and then your body will turn it into like free T4 and free T3. T3 uptake looks at kind of like the binding capacity. So they use a resin and they actually kind of mix it and they get an idea of what the capacity is. T3 uptake is really helpful for me because it helps me understand a little bit more of some potential like hormone imbalances that can impact the binding sites. So it's kind of a complicated number, but it's a really good one because when you start trying to figure out why somebody has thyroid issues, I'm telling you, it's right now there's probably close to 30 possibilities of thyroid imbalances, and that's just on the low end. There's probably even more. But the T3 uptake gives us a little bit of clues of estrogen and testosterone's relationship to the thyroid. So you want to make sure that you have that one. And then you have what's called TPO antibodies and thyroid globulin antibodies. And what antibodies are is kind of like marking that system. So antibodies aren't always bad. So your body will use antibodies to kind of turn over cells, right? Because your cells are constantly turning over, your body's turning over. So there's kind of this natural breakdown of cells in the body, and that's what they use the antibodies for. Now, the antibodies, you just don't want more than the natural turnover. So like TPO antibodies are 0 to 34. So anything above 34, you start looking at how much of active turnover is there of this enzyme and cell. So we look at TPO, and what TPO does is called thyroid peroxidase. And the thyroid peroxidase helps to capture iodine and to bring it into the cell. So there's kind of a transportation process that takes place. So your body uses iodine, and that's your thyroid peroxidase enzyme. So you can actually attack that enzyme, and when you attack it, you disrupt that whole iodine process of making T1, T2s, and then T3, T4s. Thyroid globulin is actually a kind of a globulin chain that you're able to kind of anchor in the iodine and the tyrosine. So it's kind of cool. That's part of that manufacturing plant. So you kind of lay down like a kind of like a foundation, and then you can anchor, in your other proteins, and then you attach the iodine, and that's how you start making your thyroid hormones. So basically, when you see antibodies, we say, okay, do you have an antibody towards the enzyme that helps with iodine? And do we have an antibody against the thyroid globulin, which is kind of the foundation, right? And if you're going to attack those, you're going to disrupt the conversion of iodine, you're going to disrupt the foundation and the production of hormones. Just that simple. So these TPO antibodies, like I said, they can be like 0 to 34. You can see something as low as like 35, something like that. I talked to somebody today that was 541. I think the highest I've seen on TPO antibodies was 11,000. And here's the thing on antibodies. Antibodies can fluctuate, and we'll talk about that here a little bit more again. But antibodies can fluctuate. So they don't become like the greatest marker of, hey, did you make me better? Because you can have something like, pollen increases and you have a certain tree that is releasing pollen and you happen to react to that tree. It activates your immune system and then it activates the antibodies. You could be on the beach where it's super clean air, you're eating clean, relaxed, and maybe your antibodies go down. So there's a little bit of fluctuation that can happen with antibodies. And I say this because a lot of patients come in and they're like, well, I thought I was doing better, but my antibodies went up. I'm like, well, we have to identify why your antibodies went up, not the fact that you're necessarily doing worse. Sometimes you can eat something that can cause an immune reaction. You can catch a cold. There's different things. So antibodies kind of give us an idea of turnover, and we want just the right amount and not too much. All right. So the current management of Hashimoto's, I've actually had, unfortunately, a lot of docs tell me, well, I'm not going to run antibodies because it doesn't change my treatment plan, which I understand, and that does make sense. So if somebody does have high TSH and they have thyroid antibodies, well, the current kind of management model out there is to still give medications because there's not really a medication for Hashimoto's, if that makes sense. That's where you have to dive into it. So I've had a ton of docs over the years say, well, that just doesn't change my treatment plan, so I'm not going to run them. So unfortunately, that's kind of why I think where patients struggle, because they're like, well, my doc, I don't feel like is listening to me, but they're saying there's nothing really else in the toolbox for that unless you try other medications like T4s and T3s. So that's kind of the management. And holistic is not really much better sometimes. It kind of gets frustrating, the holistic model, because you see kind of the supplements are based on symptoms. So they're really not addressing causes. They're like, well, here's a supplement for weight loss. Here's a supplement for brain fog. Here's a supplement for hair. Here's a supplement for skin. Here's a supplement for constipation. Here's a supplement for reflux. So you end up on 30, 50 supplements, and that's not really a treatment plan either, because you're just treating symptoms instead of identifying the cause. So both kind of models, holistic and traditional, I'm not too sure if like those are both really the best. So that's why we're going to kind of talk about it and say, what can we do? Well, if we can identify some of these causes and what's causing the immune dysregulation, then we're on our way to get somewhere. Okay. All right. So what's the cause? So this becomes probably the big question that all patients ask. Well, what's causing it? What's causing it? What's causing it? Now, there are some things that are easy to find, and there's some things that are really tough. So here's kind of a list of causes. And I give you this list because sometimes these are very helpful. So if you're going to visit a doc, these are things that are really helpful to us. So could you have a bacterial infection, right? So a bacterial infection can activate your immune system. So do you have something like in your sinuses, in your teeth? Do you have bacterial overgrowth in your digestive tract? I had a patient once, I was trying to identify a bacterial infection, and she ended up having some weird, encapsulated bacterial infection like in her chest wall. I mean, sometimes they're really bizarre. You see a lot of like strep infections that can really cause autoimmune conditions. Like in kids, it can cause what's called pandas. So that's a strep infection causing a neuroautoimmune condition. Certain viruses, so all viruses can have the potential of creating immune dysregulation and creating a whole lot of issues. Probably the most common viral infection that we see with Hashimoto's actually tends to be Epstein-Barr virus, or mono. So there's actually some cross-reactivity or cross-mimicry. So this kind of becomes another big topic that people are like, what does that mean? But cross-reactivity or cross-mimicry is if you have one tissue and you have a pathogen, your immune system can recognize some similar DNA sequences. So every time it attacks the virus, it attacks your tissue. And this can be the case with toxins or mold or viruses. It doesn't matter. That's kind of where you get into this, what they call cross mimicry. And that can happen with so many different things. And this is kind of where the rabbit hole starts. But here's your list. So bacteria, viruses, mold, toxins, heavy metals, food allergies, yeast, and then I put in pregnancy. And pregnancy is probably one of the other common things that we see in practice, where patients say, ever since my last pregnancy, I've not been the same. Ever since my last pregnancy, I had to increase my medication. Ever since my last pregnancy, my symptoms are all over the place. And so you kind of hear that term or that sentence, and sometimes they'll give me some clues that, hey, the pregnancy could have created some of this. And I'll kind of explain how that can actually happen. So now the causes, so kind of going back to causes, this is where we can actually look at some of your testing. This is why complete blood chemistry looks, is helpful, because we can look at, is it possible bacteria or viruses or food? And this is where we get into like other testing. So we can actually test for mold. We can test for heavy metals, test for toxins, test for food allergies, test for GI, imbalances or gut issues. I mean, there's so many cool tests out there now to really kind of pinpoint where you need to get started. All right, so let's talk about your immune system, because this is kind of the gist of this. This is the geeky version of what I'm going to tell you, but I'm going to take something geeky and make it simple in 2 seconds. So what's really kind of cool is your immune system kind of has two different major areas. So they call them Th1, Th2. So the Th1 system, it stands for T helper. So it's like a T helper subset 1, T helper subset 2. When you kind of look at how this system works, there's actually they call them cytokines, or there's immune messengers that activate one or the other. So if you get a splinter in your finger, then what happens is your body says, hey, there's something foreign that is in my finger and there's some bacteria on it. So we need to fight that, because we got to protect the person, right? We don't need bacteria in our body or in our bloodstream. So your immune system says, hey, I'm going to take care of this. So it starts sending out messengers. So it sends out all the different signals to say, hey, we need some help. We need reinforcements. We need to clean up the mess. It's kind of like calling in the fire department and the ambulance and all those different pieces, right? That's where you see all the little, like they call them IL or interleukins. So you see like interleukin 4, 5, 6, 2, 8, 10, 12, all these different interleukins, and they have different roles in your immune system. So this is where you see like a parasite can activate an autoimmunity. And actually, it's kind of funny. They can actually utilize parasites or worms actually for an autoimmune treatment. It's kind of cool medicine that's out there. But they can actually utilize some of these things. There's certain things like interleukin 6 or the IL-6 that's actually associated with stress. So if somebody's undergoing a lot of stress, could that cause an autoimmune? Could that cause Hashimoto's? Possibly. There's like interleukin 2 can be associated with like viruses, for instance. So could that be involved? TNF alpha goes with inflammation. So this is the geeky version of kind of showing you that there's a lot of things that influence our immune system, and that's the hunting piece. That's the detective work. Because if you can figure this out, then we can calm down, or your immune system has a chance to maybe regulate itself or not be so hyper responsive, right? And that's kind of what we're hoping. Because there's always kind of a short-term and a long-term treatment plan with autoimmune conditions. So this is kind of like our teeter-totter. So this is what I wanted to show you. So a lot of times with like, sometimes in the office, if you're a patient and I'm talking, I'll throw out like Th1, Th2. So a lot of times we're looking at like kind of this balance between your Th1 system and your Th2 system. So it's almost like a teeter-totter. So what you find is there's things that drive the Th1 side, there's things that drive the Th2 side. And even in medicine, if you look at some of these medicines, it's actually kind of cool. There's actually medications that can lower Th1 and lower Th2, right? And you see these mostly with like rheumatoid arthritis medications. Some of these neurological autoimmune conditions, they actually use things that lyse like the B cells so that you can drop down the teeter-totter on one side, so to speak. So I'm trying to take something super complex and make it really, really easy and simple and say, look, we're looking at this kind of like Th1, Th2 balance. And if one side gets too high, what happens is your immune system becomes overactive. And so if you have an autoimmune condition, can that spark that autoimmunity? Can it turn on a genetic predisposition and create a phenotypic expression? So are these things possible? Heck yes. This is why we want to constantly like keep our stress under control and exercise and eat healthy and don't be inflamed and take your vitamins and eat your vegetables. All these different things is because there's a reason. If something happens and your immune system gets out of kilter, what does that do to your body? And you just don't know because we're all a little bit different. Okay, so this is the teeter-totter that a lot of times I like to draw. So it's kind of showing you here, there's some really cool things that people can do. And a lot of times people kind of intuitively know this. So there's actually things that can activate or can support the Th1 side. And this is things like echinacea, golden seal astragalus. Well, this kind of makes some sense because I kind of said earlier that the Th1 side can also be involved with like viruses. So could we use something like echinacea to support Th1 so that your body can, maybe fight off a virus a little bit better? Or could it, actually kind of create some support so that when your body's able to do whatever it needs to do, does it go, oh, thank you, and does it settle back down? Right? So these are some really cool things that a lot of times patients come in and they go, oh yeah, I love, like I take echinacea all the time. I feel really good when I'm on it. And you're like, oh, that's cool. Maybe that works well for you. So those are some of what they call like Th1 herbs that you'll read about. And these are things that you can Google. It's not really making stuff up. It's all out there in the research. It's kind of cool. Now, Th2 herbs, things like green tea and caffeine. So this is really fascinating how sometimes you'll hear patients go, oh yeah, when I have green tea, I get like swollen and really brain fogged. You're like, huh, that's interesting. Another person, they drink green tea and they're like, I feel amazing. All my joint pain goes away. So this kind of tells you that, hey, there's some of these herbs that are involving your immune system, and it tells me that your immune system is kind of off. So a lot of times we'll actually utilize some of these herbs for people to kind of say, does this help you with pain? Does it help you with your brain fog? So if you have all of these thyroid symptoms, and if you drink some green tea, or if you have a supplement that has green tea extract in it, and all of a sudden your symptoms go away, that might give us another clue that there could be some Hashimoto's. And then sometimes these are some things that we can actually use to see if we can help. and if the person feels better, that's great. So this is sometimes in this world, there's a little bit of trial and error that takes place, but sometimes you guys actually give us the information and we're like, that's kind of cool. Thanks for that. So I kind of give you some like Th1 and Th2 herbs. In that book, so in Dr. Krasni's book, if you actually read through that book on page 55, 56, there's actually a little bit bigger list of those herbs. If you ever want to buy a book, usually we have them in our office, but you can get on Amazon and pretty much anywhere. But it actually has those Th1 and Th2 herbs in there and actually talks about that teeter-totter. So it's a great book to read because you can actually kind of, a lot of people tell me, they're like, I blasted through this last week and it was so great. But you can kind of go through that book and it actually gives you a little bit more step-by-step. So I'm kind of giving like the Cliff Note webinar of the book, if that helps. But that book is actually a great, great book. It's almost a lot of, even docs I know have read that book a bazillion times to really hone in on stuff. So I wanted to kind of throw out there, there's actually two more like subsets, and there's the TH subset 3 and a 17. This is not in the book, but these are some of the things that we actually lecture on and that we utilize. The TH3 system is actually called a T regulatory system. It actually helps to balance out that TH1, TH2 system. So we're all exposed to things and we're in contact with things. And so your immune system, rightfully so, should go and fight a bacteria. It should fight a head cold, a splinter, a bruise. It needs to do and deal with these immunological imbalances and things that happen in your system. But at some point, you need people to come in, you need a system to come in and say, hey, everybody needs to settle down. Like, it's been fixed, move on. And that's kind of what the TH3 system does. It regulates the 1 and the 2. So here's some really cool things that have been shown to actually support that system is vitamin D. So I kind of put in parentheses, this is what I use in the Apex world, is something called like liquid D. So I can actually kind of get your vitamin D levels up pretty quick, going in the sun. You hear all these important factors around vitamin D because it can really be supportive to the immune system. Glutathione is like your body's natural fire extinguisher. We use something called trisomal glutathione, but the glutathione is kind of like your natural fire extinguisher. It can help really kind of put out the fire and calm things down. And then fish oil. And if you were to Google any of these three things, you'll see this, like, it doesn't end. You could spend probably several weeks just reading about one of these topics. The Googles and the researches just don't seem to stop. And that's because there's a lot of great things that come out of this. That's why you hear vitamin D is good for this condition and fish oil for this and this and this. It's funny. I watch TV and you watch the news and we're like, the new study shows that vitamin D is good for this, 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 and this. And you go, well, yeah, because it balances out your immune system. That's why people do better with it. Same with fish oil, it reduces cholesterol for some people. It helps through the hair, skin, nails, brain fog, energy, joint pain, knee pain, muscle pain, right? Because it all involves supporting your immune system. And then the last one is the Th17 system. And the Th17 system is a really interesting system. It's meant to kind of activate your system. So the best analogy is kind of like if you get in a car accident, like you don't know, you got bumps and bruises and scrapes and your body's jostled and jarred and stressed out. And so that Th17 is almost like this all hands on deck, woo, woo, right? And it really tries to get everybody on board to get you better. So it's good. It's a good system to have, but it's not a good system to have day in and day out, with chronic stress, chronic inflammation, chronic health issues. That's kind of where you see this system is not great for us. And so there's actually some really great things that are kind of in the literature to help calm this down or to help support it. And so these are things that we use like turmeric, resveratrol. Turmeric, they do in studies with brain issues and Alzheimer's and inflammatory conditions. Resveratrol, this is why red wine is good and red wine is bad. So patients always joke and go, so I can just have a glass of red wine every night? I'm like, no, because the alcohol and the sugar is probably going to not be great for you. But you can actually extract the resveratrol, and they do that from a plant, and that actually can help with the immune system as well. And then glutathione again, and then I put something called nitric oxide. And there's different types. But nitric oxide is really good. There's a cardiovascular, so they call it endothelial. So there's a cardiovascular component to nitric oxide, and there's a neuronal. So there's a brain component. So you really want to kind of support like the brain and the cardiovascular system. And there's also an immune component as well that helps to kind of calm things down. So these are some of the tools in my toolbox I wanted to share because you might know, like, man, yeah, that's right. Every time I take turmeric, I feel better. This could be why. Every time I take fish oil, I feel better, and maybe that's why. So there's just a little bit of tools that maybe some of the things that you guys can do is you can try to figure out, is there something that's causing it, like a bacterial infection? If you know that if your teeth are not great, you know, that could be something you can start working on. Maybe find a holistic dentist or a biological dentist, and say, hey, can you fix these things? If you have, a really significant candida infection, because you're not eating the way you should, that's a good thing to get under control. So there's different things like that. If you're working in a facility that's very toxic with fumes and chemicals and you breathe those in every day and you're not protecting yourself, that could be something to start working on. There's things that you guys can do even before you come in to see us. All right, so that's kind of where I want to go, and I'll kind of start wrapping this up a little bit. But the metabolic areas to support is you guys there's certain things that you have control of, and that's why I try to tell a lot of try to tell patients that have autoimmune conditions. You have things that you can control, so you can control what you put in your mouth, right? So you don't have to drink 3 glasses of wine every single night. You don't have to have, a bowl of ice cream with chocolate syrup every single night before bed. There are things that you have control of. You can work on what you eat, keeping your blood sugar stable. You can go for walks. You can work on meditation. You can do yoga. You can do Pilates. You can do journaling. You can do counseling. You can, and if you do all those things, then you're going to see inflammation come down. You can see, some of these stress responses come down. So what I really want to impress upon you guys is there are things, and I'm giving you a couple supplements that you can do. There are things that you can do on your own. And usually when you get to a point where some people might be like, this is working, this is awesome. And there's other people like, I need more help. I need somebody to dig deeper. And that's when you find somebody that understands this really well. So inflammation, blood sugar, adrenals, digestion, infections, these are areas that you can also support to help your immune system and your body kind of get over this. I put in here mental health. A lot of people that come in, we have a counselor in office, Jake, and he's done webinars. So if you guys haven't listened to him, he's super, super awesome and smart and caring. But, Jake really gets into the aspects of counseling and mindful meditation. I put this in here because this is a big thing that people don't realize. Stress can activate your immune system. Stress can cause autoimmunities, right? So we want to decrease the stress. What are the things that we can control? So teaching people mindful meditation, maybe there's a job or something or a situation or relationship that is really toxic. It is hard to get people better if you're living in a toxic relationship. So what are things that you can do? What are things that the two of you can do? Or if it's in a job, can you go to a different department? This is where it gets complex. I said, like, it can be super easy or it can be super complex, but the mental health side of things is really important. So make sure that you're taking care of yourself from that standpoint. And if you need somebody like Jake, Jake is awesome. Like I said, you can always do a consult with him and see if it'd be a good fit. So in conclusion, all right, you can always, start now, that's kind of a big thing. Like I said, Hashimoto's, right? Hashimoto's is an autoimmune condition in which your immune system is attacking the thyroid via the TPO antibody or the thyroglobulin, right? So that's kind of the two areas. There's some other areas that can attack. So like Graves' disease is an autoimmune condition as well, but we're going to talk about Hashimoto's. So Hashimoto's is an autoimmune condition to the thyroid. Okay. So when the immune system is working well, the thyroid is working well. When the immune system is not working well, the thyroid is not working well. Okay. With Hashimoto's, you can have hypo symptoms. You can have a month of feeling amazing, and then you can have 2 months of feeling like a roller coaster. You can go up, you can go down, you can be great. You're all over the place. Okay. That's kind of your hallmark for Hashimoto's. You look at the TSH, it's up, it's down, it's normal. Did you know you can have normal labs and still have thyroid antibodies, because when your immune system or when your thyroid shifts from hyper to hypo, at some point it has to shift through neutral. So you can actually take a snapshot and you can see where somebody looks like they're normal and everything's fine, but they were shifting, right? So there's been times when I've given people blood work and I said, here, when you feel crummy, go get your blood work done, and wham, there comes all of dysfunction. The thyroid's off, the antibodies are high, and you go, I got it. Like I finally caught the tiger by its tail, right? So that's Hashimoto's. So you can do things. There's things that in your control, and you can try to figure out what it is. If you have mold in your house, you got to get that fixed, right? So that's something you can start working on. If you're not eating healthy, you can start working on that. If you're not exercising, work on that. If you have a toxic relationship, work on that. There are certain things that you guys can work on that actually makes our life super easy, because those big things are already being addressed, so that we can start going deeper into finding other causes. You can have 2, 3, 4, 5 causes to this, and that's where it gets complex again. Or sometimes you just got sick one day and your immune system just never was able to get back on track, right? So it's never too late. That's kind of a question everybody asks us, and it's not too late to get this under control. It's not too late to feel better. Even if you had Hashimoto's for 20 years, you can still do things to make it better. My goal is to educate, to help you guys, from an acute standpoint, and then give you tools and education for the long term. The other thing that kind of drives me crazy is there are a lot of docs out there that say you can cure autoimmune conditions. You can't, right? And they'll say, well, I made the antibodies go away and the patient's symptoms went away. Well, that's fantastic. But I want to see that if you cured it, then the patient should be able to do whatever they want, go wherever they want, eat whatever they want, and not have any problems. And that's just not the case. So a lot of people who are doing really, really well know what they can eat, what they are not supposed to eat. They've also cleaned up, their mold or their toxin or their fumes or their chemicals, or they stopped using things that have parabens, or they stopped eating genetically modified foods. There are things that people have done that made them better, but it doesn't mean you cured it. So that's just something that to kind of watch for. So if somebody can cure it, that'd be super cool, but that's a pretty strong word. So there are some things that you can do to manage it incredibly well and have a great life and be able to do what you want, knowing your limitations, right? And some people, they have very little limitations, and some people may have a little bit more. So it just kind of depends. We're all unique. We all have different genotypes and genetic and phenotypic expressions. We all have different lives with, whether it be job, marriage, kids, you name it. We're all a little bit different, and we all have baggage. So I think my favorite thing is you hear people talk about baggage, and I had a patient tell me one time, they're like, everybody has baggage. I'm trying to bring on a travel on. I was like, that's good. You have some people that have the big suitcases that they take on a big long European trip, and then you have the people that have an overnight bag. So we all have stuff. We're all working to stay healthy. But just know that there's things that you can do, there's things that you can control, and you can get better. We do offer free 30-minute consultations. They're absolutely free. You can do it with any of us. So you've heard us on the radio, you've heard us on webinars. Jake is awesome, Dr. Maynard, myself. So we are all doing free consultations. If you want to meet us, you can do it in person, you can do a teleconference. We can even do, the Hashimoto's kind of works well. We can do that telehealth. We're all pretty set up. I've been doing it for years, so we can ship things to you. We can ship an email requisition form to you to get things done. We can make this work. So even if it's not feasible to come in, and we can still help you out, and we can go over that during the consultation. So you guys have been awesome. Thank you so much for allowing us to continue doing webinars. If you don't know, we got our YouTube channel set up, so you can click and hit subscribe. You can also, click to the next YouTube video, and you can watch anything from what Jake has done to Dr. Maynard. So we'll keep adding more and more videos and give you guys more and more information to help you along. So thanks a lot for allowing us to be a part of your life, and we'll see you at the next webinar.